want to welcome our witnesses. This morning we are going to focus on the topic Emergence of Swap Execution Facilities, a Progress Report. The financial crisis revealed some significant weaknesses in our financial sector. One of the most problematic was the over-the-counter derivatives market. As a result, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010 developed new rules for the OTC market to insulate both the U.S. economy and the American taxpayer from any future extraordinary losses in this area. In particular, Dodd-Frank mandated that all cleared trades be executed either on an exchange or on a new trading platform called a swap execution facility, or SEF. The Dodd-Frank Act defined a swap execution facility as a facility, trading system, or platform in which multiple participants have the ability to execute or trade swaps by accepting bids and offers made by multiple participants in the facility or system through any means of interstate commerce. The development of SEFs should transform the current trading marketplace by providing significantly greater pre- and post-trade transparency for regulators and market participants alike. In addition, once a trade has been completed, a counterparty should be able to compare the price it receives on a particular trade with the price of similar trades by and for similarly standardized products. This information should also be useful to those analyzing the effectiveness of hedging strategies. Finally, increased transparency in the new trade reporting requirements will give regulators better information and additional tools to monitor the swaps market for possible market manipulation. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission and the Securities and Exchange Commission have both proposed rules to implement the SEF provisions of the Dodd-Frank Act for swaps or security-based swaps under their respective jurisdictions. In addition, because standardized swaps that are cleared must be traded on exchange or a SEF, Dodd-Frank requires clearinghouses to provide open access to various execution venues. Both the SEC and CTFC have proposed rules that implement the open access requirements of the Dodd-Frank Act to encourage competition in the SEF and clearinghouse market. All of us have a vested interest in making sure these new derivative swap execution facilities function safely, efficiently, and fairly. Hopefully, our hearing this morning will help us understand best how we can accomplish this objective. Senator Crapo and I have invited witnesses that represent a variety of opinions and perspectives to our hearing. Unfortunately, due to scheduling difficulties, the large dealer bank we invited was unable to appear before the subcommittee today. Nonetheless, we hope the conversations we have this morning spur deeper thought on these complicated issues, and we encourage participation by written testimony or comments after the fact, and that both industry and policymakers continue to work together to make our swaps markets the most transparent, competitive, and efficient in the world. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and at this time I'd like to recognize the ranking member, Senator Crapo. Senator Crapo.
Thank you very much, Senator Reid, and I appreciate the opportunity we have to work together on this committee and also the fact that you have noticed this hearing with regard to SEFs. There are a number of different electronic trading models that could be potentially used for derivatives trading depending on the final rules that the SEC and the CFTC and international regulators adopt. But I want to focus just on a couple of concerns that I see as facing right now in our current posture. While Title VII of the Dodd-Frank Act states that the SEC and the CFTC shall consult and coordinate to the extent possible for the purpose of assuring regulatory consistency and compatibility, it appears that the lawyers for the two agencies, or maybe the other personnel of the agencies as well, have not been able to agree on what these terms mean. We should not then be surprised that the two agencies have proposed inconsistent approaches to the same rule sets. For the swap execution facility rules, the SEC approach, in my opinion, is a more principles-based approach and is in general far less prescriptive than that of the CFTC. While the Dodd-Frank Act missed a great opportunity, in my opinion, to merge the SEC and CFTC and stop the bifurcation of futures and securities markets, we lost that opportunity then. We should at least continue to push for more coordination and consistent rules. Swap execution facilities are likely to dually register with both agencies, and it makes a lot of sense for the two regimes to be consistent. While I applaud the SEC for taking a more flexible approach relative to the CFTC, Both agencies need to make their rules more accommodative of the different types of SEFs to provide maximum choice in trade execution to market participants. Under the current CFTC SEF version, the proposed rule requires swap users to request prices from no fewer than 5 dealers at a time. This is generating a lot of controversy from the end-user community, which argues that it may ultimately serve to unnecessarily disadvantage end users by limiting their ability to choose appropriate numbers of counterparties and the mode of execution in the way that they deem to be the most efficient and effective to hedge their commercial risk. Since Dodd-Frank stipulates that the transactions required to be cleared must also be evaluated on a SEF or designated contract market, there is significant interplay between the clearing, trading, and definition of block trades. According to the end users, this could create a problem for some less liquid trades that would be suitable for clearing, but not necessarily for trade execution. I've also been advised that the SEC's SEF approach is more consistent with what the Europeans are looking at, but I have not actually seen the exact comparison. If we want to find a common international framework in order to avoid regulatory arbitrage and avoid competitive disadvantage to our markets, we need to provide greater coordination and harmonization to get the rules right rather than rushing them through. This is just a short summary of some of the issues that I'm concerned about that I think we ought to focus on in today's hearing. I also welcome today's witnesses, and I look forward to what we will hear.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Crapo. And before I ask Senator Corker if he has comments, let me associate myself with your comments about collaboration, the joint regulation between the SEC and CFTC. I hope one of the results of this hearing is to be able to focus their attention on coming up with a consistent rule for both agencies rather than two distinct set of rules. I think that is going to, the intent clear, as you point out in Dodd-Frank, was to have one set of consistent, appropriate, flexible rules. And I, again, second your very insightful comments on that regard. Senator Cork, do you have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking forward, as usual, to the testimony and appreciate you having the hearing.
Thank you very much. Let me introduce the first panel. Our first witness is Mr. Kevin McPartland. He is a principal and director of fixed income research at TAB Group. Mr. McPartland joined the TAB Group as a senior research manager in 2007 from management consultancy Detica, where he was a senior manager in the Global Financial Markets Division. Prior to joining Detica, he held positions at J.P. Morgan Chase in equities and futures and options, managing development and implementation of electronic trading systems. Thank you. Our next witness is Mr. Neil Brady. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Eris Exchange. Prior to co-founding Eris Exchange and assuming the role of CEO, Mr. Brady served as Managing Director of Business Development at CME Group, where he was responsible for the growth of the CME Group's OTC and global business. Prior to CME, he founded and served as Chief Executive Officer of Liquidity Direct Technology, a leading platform for interest rate derivatives trading that was acquired by CME in January 2004. Our next witness is Mr. Ben McDonald. He is a naturalized U.S. citizen residing in New York City. Thank you for that, Mr. McDonald. He is the global head of fixed income products for Bloomberg LP, a position he has held since May 2010. And in that capacity, he heads up Bloomberg's Swap Execution Facility Development Initiative. Prior to joining Bloomberg, he worked at Goldman Sachs, managing the credit default swap operations team, and at J.P. Morgan Chase, where he held several positions in interest rate derivatives. Our final member of the panel is Mr. James Corley. Mr. Corley is the Chief Executive Officer of Javelin Capital Markets, an electronic execution venue for credit derivatives and interest rate swaps. Javelin expects to register as a swaps execution facility. He is also the founder of the Swaps and Derivatives Market Association, an industry trade group of several dealer and clearing brokers that advocates for the successful OTC derivatives clearing, open access, and transparency. Mr. Corley has 20 years of derivative sales and trading experience, working for many years in the credit markets for Solomon Brothers, Lehman Brothers, Bank of America. Most recently, Mr. Corley ran IDX Capital, a credit derivatives interdealer broker. Now, I thank you all for being here this morning. I wonder, Senator Merkley, do you have any opening comments? Thank you. I would ask the witnesses to limit their remarks to 5 minutes. Your written statements will be completely incorporated into the record, so there's no need to read them. And Mr. McPartland, if you could begin, please. Thank you.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Crapo, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today to discuss progress and concerns surrounding the creation of swap execution facilities. I'm Kevin McPartland, the Principal and the Director of Fixed Income Research at Tab Group. Tab Group is a strategic research and advisory firm focused exclusively on the institutional capital markets. Our clients span the entire investment landscape, including investment banks, pension plans, mutual funds, hedge funds, high-frequency traders, FCMs, exchanges, and clearinghouses. In order for this new market structure to be successful, swap execution facilities must be given broad latitude in defining and implementing their business models. This includes, but is not limited to, the mechanisms used for trading and the risk profiles of their members. This will promote the innovation and competition that has made the U.S. capital markets the envy of the world. It is also critical that the mechanisms to move trades quickly and easily from execution to clearing are well defined. If market participants worry that the trade they have just executed on a SEF might later in the day be canceled due to a clearinghouse rejection, confidence in the entire market model will erode quickly and severely limit the transparency and systemic risk reduction the Dodd-Frank Act was intended to improve. Let's examine these points in detail. Firstly, SEF should not be driven to a particular trading model. Despite the inclusion of the request for quote model in proposals from the CFTC and SEC, regulators are still keen to have swaps trade through an order book with continuous two-sided quotes. Tab Group research shows that order book trading will emerge naturally. 81% of our study participants believe that we will have continuous order book trading of vanilla interest rate swaps within 2 years of SEF rule implementation. However, the existence of an electronic order book does not guarantee liquidity, nor that market participants will trade there. For example, of the roughly 300,000 contracts available for trading in the highly electronic U.S. equity options market, trading in only the top 100 names makes up nearly 70% of the volume. The rest are seen as so illiquid that it is often easier to trade OTC with a broker rather than try and execute that same contract on the screen. Furthermore, despite the market's electronic nature, Tab Group research shows that in 2010, as much as 97% of all options trading volume generated by asset managers was done over the phone. Second, we should encourage SEFs to set membership requirements to encourage a variety of liquidity pools. The U.S. equity market presents a good example. 13 registered exchanges and another 55 alternative execution venues exist to trade U.S. equities for a total of 68. Why are there so many? Because different market participants trade in different ways and have different needs. Some like to trade in large size, some small. Some are very concerned about price, while others are more concerned about getting a trade done quickly. Because of this, the equity market responded with new venues to meet those needs. In the current swaps market, a smaller player cannot trade in the interdealer market, even if they have the capital and desire. In the new market, as long as a trading firm meets the requirements set forth by the SEF, they will be and should be allowed into trade. The important point to note is that setting membership requirements for SEFs is not exclusionary, but instead intended to help market participants trade in the most suitable environment possible. Open access to clearing will play a huge role in the success or failure of all SEFs. It is central clearing, not the SEF construct itself, that will allow easier access to trading and new market participants to enter. But a clearinghouse providing only the ability to accept SEF-executed trades is not enough. SEFs are intent on providing click-to-trade functionality, that when you accept the price enough, whether in an order book or via a request for quote, the trade is done. However, a trade is not done until it is accepted for clearing, something that SEFs have little, if any, control over. That raises the question, can a SEF ensure a trade will be accepted for clearing before it allows the trade to execute? And even if it can, is that the SEF's responsibility? Either way, clearing certainty is crucial to the success of SEFs. If market participants do not trust that SEF-executed trades are firm, confidence in the entire market model will erode quickly. It is critical that a mechanism be put in place to formalize this process, ensuring the market can have full faith in the trades that execute on a SEF. There have been considerable speculation as to the number of SEFs that will exist. The wildest number I've heard is 100, which is simply unrealistic. If the U.S. equities market has 68 venues and the U.S. futures market has 3 main players, the swaps market will fall somewhere in the middle. Our research shows also that nearly 60% of market participants believe the ideal number of SEFs per asset class is 3 to 4, resulting in 15 to 20 SEFs covering interest rates, credit, FX, commodities, and equities. There will be many more than that to start, but not 100. Our list at Tab Group shows as many as 40 firms that plan to apply. But 87% of our study participants believe that SEF consolidation will begin 2 years or less from the date of rule implementation. We are now in the pre-CEF era. Business models and technology are still being finalized, but most CEFs are registration ready, and trade flow is beginning to pick up on the screen as most everyone has accepted that these changes are inevitable. Even if trading mandates don't take effect until the fourth quarter of 2012, a time frame that seems more and more realistic, the change is so enormous for most swaps traders that getting started now should present just enough time to make the switch. As rules are finalized, it is critical that while putting in place necessary oversight, new OTC derivatives rules encourage the innovation and competition that have made the U.S. capital markets the most envied in the world. Thank you for your time.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Crapo, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the implementation of the Dodd-Frank Act, specifically the development of CEFs. I am Neil Brady, Chief Executive Officer of Eris Exchange, LLC. Eris Exchange is an electronic futures exchange that began offering the trading of a cleared interest rate swap futures contract in July 2010 in response to the passage of the Dodd-Frank Act. Since its inception, Eris Exchange has traded over $33 billion in notional value of interest rate swap futures, which are cleared at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Eris Exchange filed an application with the CFTC in April of this year to be designated as a contract market, or DCM. A DCM is a traditional exchange in which regulated futures contracts have been traded for over 100 years. As a DCM, Eris Exchange will be permitted to list both financial futures as well as swaps. As such, Eris Exchange will satisfy the Dodd-Frank execution mandate and will operate alongside CEFs in the cleared interest rate swap space. My opening comments are focused on the regulatory incentives that can facilitate the successful development of CEFs. I'll also comment on a few arguments heard in the industry recently related to perceived operational impediments to CEFs and how these concerns have already been solved for in the futures industry model. First, Eris Exchange believes that the most important regulatory incentive that the CFTC can provide for CEFs is to announce clear dates for the implementation of the clearing and trading mandates. The industry is ready to trade and clear interest rate swaps. CEF-like platforms and DCMs are already connected to the major clearinghouses and are operationally ready to transact swaps and equivalent futures contracts. The market is simply awaiting a clear timetable from the CFTC before committing the resources for final implementation. As soon as the timetable is announced, customers will select preferred clearing firms and trading platforms, complete documentation, and begin final testing. In announcing a timetable, one of the most market-based and competition-friendly actions that the CFTC can take is to implement the trading mandate soon after the clearing mandate. By mandating execution and ensuring open access to all clearing venues, regulators will foster true competition in swaps and create a level playing field for the emergence of new entrants and technology-driven innovation. If, on the other hand, there is a significant lag between the clearing and trading mandates, incumbent firms will be heavily motivated to direct clearing to their preferred clearing venue and will transact on closed platforms dominated by incumbent firms. Such a time lag runs the risk of severely constraining the ability of new entrants to effectively compete in the execution of cleared swaps. Second, I would like to address a few arguments heard in the industry today that are aimed at slowing down the implementation of the Dodd-Frank Act. Specifically, concerns have been raised that the documentation required for market participants to execute and clear swaps is so extensive that it will require untold hours of negotiation and impose burdensome legal costs on customers. This is an exaggerated concern. The futures documentation structure provides a model that should be utilized as a baseline for documentation in the cleared swaps market. In the futures model, there is no need for each user to enter into detailed ISDAs with every other user. For example, to trade on Eris Exchange, a participant and a participant's clearing firm need only enter into a single agreement totaling 2 pages one time. Another argument heard today in the industry is that it is impossible to trade interest rate swaps in an open electronic order book, and therefore the traditional OTC execution model must be maintained. Eris Exchange provides concrete evidence that this argument is flawed. Today, Eris Exchange has a live, open, anonymous electronic central limit order book offering trading for standard maturities of interest rate swap futures. Clearing firms guarantee each order and monitor risk using credit controls that are built centrally into our trading platform. I've submitted a screenshot of the Eris Exchange central limit order book, which shows live bids and offers on our screen that are fully transactable and for which users receive instant confirmations of cleared trades with the click of a mouse. In conclusion, it's worth noting that in the futures industry, the migration from pit-based trading to screen-based trading unleashed a tremendous wave of innovation in which the U.S. derivatives industry emerged as a world leader. If regulators announce a clear timeline and apply the proper incentives, the implementation of Dodd-Frank has the potential to spur a similar technological revolution that will deliver on the real benefits of the legislation, bringing greater transparency and a wider variety of counterparties into the swaps market and thereby reducing systemic risk. Thank you for your invitation to testify here today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Mr. McDonald, please.
Good morning, Chairman Reid and members of the subcommittee. It is a pleasure to appear before you today. My name is Ben McDonald, and I'm the global head of the fixed income products for Bloomberg LP, a privately held company based in New York. Bloomberg is dedicated to registering as both a swaps execution facility and a security-based swaps execution facility under Title VII of the Dodd-Frank Act. Bloomberg's customer base is evenly distributed amongst the buy side and the sell side. Therefore, as an independent company, we are not beholden nor are we biased towards any particular element of the market. First of all, Bloomberg fully supports Title VII's mandatory clearing and post-trade reporting requirements. Clear and specific rules for those provisions will serve as the most significant tools for reducing systemic risk and attaining needed transparency for a reformed and financially sound derivatives marketplace that benefits all participants. As with all new regulations, however, the devil is in the detail. And today we have concerns that these regulations will be promulgated in a way that inhibits market trading flexibility and raises the cost to the end user, and therefore does not fully achieve the goals set out by Dodd-Frank. We know that the systemic risk threats that arose in 2008 and 2009 were associated with insufficient clearing and post-trade price transparency and were not the result of execution failures. Trading protocols were not the problem. We believe that federal regulators should not go to extravagant lengths to define the most favorable terms of execution for trading, but what can only be characterized as a market of sophisticated users. Rather, what should be incumbent on federal regulators is to ensure that the market is fair and competitive and that participants themselves have enough information to assess whether they know they got a fair price or not. One of the risks that federal regulators run in micromanaging execution protocols is that they will increase the direct cost of trading with no real compensatory benefit to customers. In addition, they will impose artificial constraints and significant indirect costs that incentivize market participants to revert to forms of trading that evade the excessive regulation as unnecessary costs. Ultimately, the threat is that market participants will easily find alternative ways to conduct their trading in non-CEF environments, including taking their trading to foreign jurisdictions where US rules do not apply. Rather, we believe that federal regulators should instead use a principle-based approach that encourages flexible trading protocols by CEFs. Secondly, the difference in rules promulgated by the CFTC and the SEC will create a significant compliance cost. The Dodd-Frank requires the two agencies to coordinate their approaches. It remains to be seen whether they will sufficiently do so in their respective final regulations. If they do not, an entity desiring to operate as both a CEF and a security-based CEF will be compelled to create two separate companies to trade similar instruments. Please note that this affects each potential CEF and security-based CEF, but also their clients, many of whom currently use the same individual traders to execute both instruments. This barrier will drive a concentration in the CEF security-based CEF space and could create a too-big-to-fail situation for the remaining CEFs in the marketplace, which is exactly the opposite of what Congress intended when it enacted Dodd-Frank. It is our opinion that costs can be reduced by providing the opportunity for CEFs to contract with third-party service providers for market surveillance and discipline duties, as long as the CEFs meet the requirements within Dodd-Frank that they retain full ultimate responsibility for decision-making involving those functions. Practical liberal utilization of third-party service providers will enable CEFs to reduce their capital and operational costs relating to the infrastructure of those functions and thereby reduce the cost of entry into the CEF marketplace. In addition, CEFs should also be permitted to rely on the regulation and oversight performed by swaps clearinghouses, rather than have to replicate essentially the same activity at the CEF level. For example, if a clearinghouse accepts a market participant or a swap for clearing, the CEF should be permitted to rely on that assessment for core principle compliance purposes under the CEF regulatory regime. In addition, the SEC's rules on governance and financial reporting should be strictly linked to the requirements in Dodd-Frank, because extending the rules beyond the Act's requirements effectively inhibits the entry of new security-based CEFs. For example, an aspiring security-based CEF such as Bloomberg, who are already independently owned and controlled, could be discouraged if faced with SEC rules that would force us to cede control of our affiliated SB CEF to an independent board. While SEC has suggested they may require this result, it is not required by Dodd-Frank, nor is that a requirement written into the CFTC's proposed regulations. The goals of promoting competition among CEFs, lowering barriers to entry, and allowing consistent trading environment demand that the two federal regulators devise coordinated rules. and not work in silos. It is our hope that Congress can assist in this process. In summary, we are concerned that we may be on the road to creating a too-big-to-fail and utility-style CEF landscape that will increase costs for the end user, encourage non-CEF trading, and ultimately reduce the benefits of central clearing and price transparency. Mr. Chairman, on behalf of Bloomberg, I want to thank you for this opportunity to share our views on this important issue, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. Mr. Qualley, please.
Chairman Reid, Ranking Member Crapo, and members of the subcommittee, my name is James Coley. I'm Chief Executive Officer of Javelin Capital Markets, an electronic execution venue of OTC derivatives that will register as a SAF or swap execution facility under the Dodd-Frank Act. I'm also here today to represent the interests of the Swaps and Derivatives Market Association, which is comprised of several independent derivatives dealers and clearing brokers, some of whom are the largest in the world. Thank you for inviting me here today to testify. Without a doubt, it is mission critical that central clearing, increased transparency, and broader liquidity is properly achieved under the Act for the OTC derivative marketplace. Toward that goal, it's important that CEFs be allowed to properly function and compete with each other, whereby Congress and the regulators ensure that such organizations and various execution models be neither discriminated against nor penalized by trade workflow or documentation efforts that show preference for one CEF over another. Only by access to a fair, level, and open playing field will CEFs be properly able to play their part in lessening of systemic risk to which the derivative marketplace contributed during the global financial crisis of 2008. With regard to product eligibility, clearinghouses should recognize that the fair majority of interest rate and credit derivative products do qualify for clearing. Regulators should be mindful to ensure that clearinghouses do not favor acceptance of certain products that have built-in trade restrictions that impede open access or customer choice. While intellectual property rights may protect innovation in the short term with regard to certain swap products or indices, they may restrict trade or liquidity in the long run. Market participants should be allowed to trade such products to meet their investor or hedging objectives. Intellectual property rights for such products should adapt with the post-Dodd-Frank marketplace, where anonymous and transparent markets flourish. Regulators should work with such IP holders to both ensure that their rights are properly protected, but that the prudential need of the broader market is also addressed. With regard to CEF access to clearinghouses and their constituent clearing members should do as the Act requires, accept trades on an execution-blind basis. DCOs should not discriminate against trades simply because they or their shareholders dislike the method in which such trades occur. Clearinghouses should refrain from using CEF sign-up documentation as a vehicle through which to restrict trade. As a precondition to access, clearinghouses should not require that CEF sign non-compete clauses such that clearinghouses' other businesses, be they execution-based or not, are inappropriately protected from outside competition. Likewise, clearing firms should not require that CEFs contract with them to restrict the rights or privileges of end users as a precondition to CEF DCO connectivity. Such requirements serve no prudential role with regard to risk mitigation and run contrary to the open provisions of the Act. Clearinghouses should not require that a CEF purposely engage in a trade workflow that adds latency or creates unnecessary steps in the post-trade settlement process. Instead, clearinghouses and their constituent clearing firms should draw from their own proven and well-tested experience in the listed derivative space. They should accept trades symmetrically and in real time. Immediate acceptance of swaps trades into clearing is critical to accomplishing the goals of the Dodd-Frank Act to reduce systemic risk, increase trade integrity, and promote market stability. Settlement uncertainty caused by time delays between the point of trade execution and the point of trade acceptance into clearing can destroy investor confidence in the cleared OTC derivative markets. As the CFTC has correctly asserted, such a time delay or trade latency, which in the bilateral swaps market can be as long as a week, directly constrains liquidity, financial certainty, and increases risk. Clearinghouses and their clearing members should do as the regulators have required and accept trades into clearing immediately upon execution on a CEF. Regulators should be wary of certain incumbent efforts that claim to bring execution certainty through documentation. Such documentation sets in place workflow that clearly favors requests for quote execution models over exchange-like central limit order books. Such documentation denies the customer the right to trade anonymously with multiple counterparties because under such a workflow the dealer counterparty requires that the identity of the customer be known before the trade occurs. This is not the case with documentation and workflow requirements in cleared derivatives markets currently in futures and options. In those markets, buyers and sellers trade in multiple trade venues where trade integrity, counterparty anonymity, and optimal liquidity is assured through access to multiple counterparties. Such restrictive workflow and documentation should be seen for what it is, nothing more than a transparent attempt to limit customer choice, restrict trade, and drain liquidity. In conclusion, the role of the swap execution facility with regard to lessening systemic risk should not be understated. To fulfill the CEF's role in fostering greater liquidity and transparency, Congress and the regulators should continue to be proactive and protect the market against Dodd-Frank implementation choke points. They should continue to ensure that all CEFs have fair and open access to clearing in the marketplace. I thank you for your time, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your very thoughtful testimony. Let me just sort of lay out the logistics. We have a vote at 11, and we have another panel. I would propose 7-minute rounds, and I know we're not going to be able to ask all the questions we want to ask, so be prepared for additional questions in following up the hearing. But let me begin by thanking you for your insightful testimony and address a question to the whole panel on that, and it's been touched upon. Specifically, in response to the CFTC notice of comment, the Justice Department Antitrust Division raised some concerns about their proposed rules with respect to the ability of major dealers to control access to the market unless there is, in the CEFs, unless there are some ownership limits, aggregate ownership limits, or individual ownership limits, together with governance issues. I know you all talked about it, but the goal I think we all share is to maximize competition and while at the same time limiting barriers to entry into these platforms and these processes. So if you might elaborate, starting with Mr. Partlin and down to Mr. Corley.
It's important that we still have the major dealers involved actively, right? This is their market. If we talk in other areas of finance, we talk about having skin in the game. The last thing is we want are some of the biggest traders in these products not actively involved and invested in the success of these entities. I think the language of Dodd-Frank and some of the proposed rules will ensure that we will still have open access. The access to clearing is really what will open these markets up because it takes out a good amount of the counterparty risk. Whereas now in the bilateral world, a dealer could quite rightly choose to not trade with the counterparty if they felt their credit wasn't up to par. The clearinghouse helps to mitigate those concerns. But the short answer here is we need the dealers still involved. This isn't about pushing them out. It's about keeping them in the position they're in and then opening up the market to more competition beyond that.
Mr. Brady.
At Eris Exchange, we don't think restrictions on ownership are a good idea. We think that people most likely to actually be new entrants and provide a credible alternative and increase competition in the space are precisely those people like the founders of our exchange who are in the market and are able to drive forward with a platform like this. We think the focus instead should be on the issues like open access, real-time trade acceptance, making sure the CEFs and the clearinghouses are open and available for people to trade on.
But that, just to follow up, so your notion is ownership is not the issue, open access. So the rules that SEC and CFTC have to come up with have to really provide an incentive for broad-based participation and prevent, regardless of ownership, sort of favoring one entity. I think I'm restating what you said.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely vital to allow anyone who's qualified and fulfills certain requirements to have access to a cleared product and access on a CEF, whether the owner of that platform, I think that's less relevant.
One of the issues that's come up in the context of the present sort of ad hoc system is the requirements for capital to participate, et cetera, are being set by sort of the big players, basically. Yeah. And there is at least some suggestion that these requirements are not necessary for the market to function, but they're quite conducive to continued dominance.
Right.
Do you have any comments?
Yeah, in our view at Eris Exchange and the partners that I represent, I mean, that's a much more critical issue than the actual ownership. It's the restrictions on clearing or membership to clearing ought to be based on risk-based, criteria and who can step in the case of a default. In the case of the futures industry, the people who took care of the Lehman bankruptcy, for example, it was an open auction. A number of the players who actually ended up picking up a portfolio were not clearing members or non-clearing members. I think a market-based solution and criteria like that are much more important than ownership restrictions.
Let me go to Mr. McDonald, Mr. Corley. Yeah, Ms. McDonald, please.
Yes, so I think this is quite an interesting question. From our perspective, we already are an independent company, so it's kind of disincentivizing, if you will, to from a commercial perspective, to be put to try and build a business in the CEF space that's competitive and then have to cede control of the board of that. It doesn't really make sense. We understand and we recognize the need for governance and independence, and we think that's a good thing. However, we also think there needs to be a mechanism for companies such as ourselves and other companies who are already independent to operate in this space without being penalized for being independent. And I think that goes to the crux of our issue. I do think there's one other point which kind of touches on what Neil was saying, which is that CEFs have different models. In some cases, they take on principal risk because of the nature of their business, and in some cases, they don't. And I think, again, when we look at capital requirements, we need to make sure that they're commensurate with the style of CEF that we're talking about, because there clearly isn't a one-size-fits-all in the CEF landscape, and there shouldn't be.
I can presume, though, that you would not object to a certain number of independent directors, for example, in the governance of these things.
No.
The control issue.
No, and we understand, and we totally. I mean, we think it's a very good idea. We just think that there's a practical limit which kind of goes a little bit too far.
Mr. Corley, please.
We think that whenever you have a dramatic change in market structure, such that we're currently undergoing as a result of the crisis in 2008. The government and regulators really should monitor and engage when necessary, when you have a marketplace moving from the haves to the have-nots. So whereas the old market in the bilateral space had 10 or 15 dealers, I don't think anyone's trying to exclude them from the future. I think it's more a function of including another 25 or 30 dealers and broadening the competitive range. So, and as you go into that, as you go and experience that change, it's important that any governance structure, whether it be at a DCO or a clearinghouse or indeed at a CEF, have a fair degree of transparency and a fair degree of market participation on material committees that address the prudential issues concerning these organizations. It's not enough to come in and say, look, shareholders have a right, or the management have a right to enhance shareholder value. That's clear. But CEFs, and more specifically DCOs, share a broader prudential need to the marketplace. And in so doing, need to address that and have open governance, which you can separate from economic interest. We just ask that it be open, transparent, and be truly representative of the marketplace, not only in terms of dealers, but also in terms of clearing members and also market participants and end users.
Thank you all, gentlemen. Senator Crapo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And in light of the time restraint we have, I'm going to ask just one question and then try to give each of you an opportunity to comment on it if you would like. So I encourage you also to be concise in your responses. And my question relates to the fact that end users have expressed concern to me that many of their larger, less liquid transactions may not fit within the definition of a block trade that's being proposed because of its limited nature. And they're concerned also with things like the requirement to bid trades to no fewer than 5 market participants, or the delay built in terms of the processing of block trades. And that these things may provide or create a dynamic in the market that will then drive up the cost of operations. I'd like to know, my question is, do you agree with these concerns? And if so, what can we do to address them?
If I can, Kevin, you want to go first? Or I think if you look at block trades, you have to consider the tension, Senator, on both sides. Whereas on one side, there's the market need for transparency. The most important aspect, or the most important information that any trader, any market participant can have is where the last trade occurred, at what price and at what time. And to go into a marketplace and not know that is putting that individual, that entity at a disadvantage. So on one side, the customer has the right to know, or should have the right to know, consistent with other markets, where the last trade occurred. But then on the other side, large dealers and large participants are less incented to create liquidity for block trades. So it really falls down, if you look to other markets, A, what should the size of a block trade be, and what should there be a delay, and how long should that be? That delay should be such that the market maker has the opportunity to hedge their risk on such a block trade. If that time period is too short, then the market maker is loath to make a market in such size. If it's too long, then the end user is disadvantaged. The way we've suggested you consider that is to look to other markets, especially in the interest rate swap or in the interest rate futures context, and set a rate or a block size notional that is consistent with those markets, and also a time frame that's consistent with those other markets, as well as a good base from which to go.
Thank you. Mr. McPartland, did you want to comment?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, information leakage is a big concern for all end users and buy-side market participants. And if we look at the swaps market, the size of the transactions and the infrequency that many of these contracts are traded makes it even more of a concern. And I think that echoes some of Jamie's points. This is why, and again, it's sort of a parallel in the equities world. This is why crossing networks developed, for example. Buy-side firms that needed to do large-size trades had a hard time doing that in the open market, so they found a new mechanism. Goes back to my earlier comments that if we provide or allow latitude for CEF to create market models that suit different market participants, we could end up with an environment that is suitable to doing those large-size trades. If we don't allow for that type of environment, you could force end users to look to more liquid products that they would have to do in smaller size to get their large size done. Could result in an imperfect hedge. An imperfect hedge then means more risk rather than less risk for those end users.
Thank you. Mr. Brady?
Yeah, we think this issue is it's a very important issue. We think it's the issue that really highlights the need for a principles-based approach to regulation, because the issues are very interrelated. Whether you should require 5 counterparties to be pinged on a request for quote and the block trade limit. If you set the block trade threshold correctly, you can have a stricter requirement to send the RFQ, because you believe at larger size you have the flexibility to do the blocks. But every market's different. Standardized products are different than very bespoke products, and I think that the futures industry is a great example of how this works. There are block trades allowed. They're set at a certain threshold that's principles-based, and large size is able to be transacted when needed, but then the rest of the trades occur either in a central limit order book or through a very wide-open request for quote process.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald?
I would echo a lot of the points that have been made. I think the key point here is actually that the end user needs to have the flexibility of means of execution. I think that for a same trade, the ability to get executed or to get liquidity will vary depending on a given set of market circumstances. So it's very hard to kind of put down a set of very defined rules and think that they'll work in every circumstance. They won't. And I do think that the market will, as long as it is a principle-based approach and as long as there are guidelines around execution that manage that process, I think the market will, as Kevin pointed out, reach a happy medium where it will provide the necessary means of execution for different circumstances.
Thank you. I'll yield back a couple minutes to you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, thank you very much. Senator Marco, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of you for your testimony. I wanted to start, Mr. Brady, with your comments about the value of setting effective dates for the CFTC to set clear dates for both trading and clearing. And I thought maybe just give you a chance to, if you wanted to advise the CFTC, what dates you'd be recommending that they set and why.
Yeah, I mean, the general point that we'd like to stress is we believe the marketplace is ready. I mean, you have examples of platforms and swap execution facilities that are ready and operational today, connected back to clearinghouses. In our view, the market is really looking for a clear signal to focus around and then motivate people to make decisions, commit resources. And a lot of the issues we're discussing today in the industry really can be settled with people who are highly motivated and with a deadline to reach. A lot of sort of the documentation issues, the credit control issues, these sorts of issues. We've put forth in various comment letters a time frame that talks about completing all the final rules through the end of this year, allowing provisional registration of SEFs, so we don't slow down that process. Beginning with some clear mandates starting, first quarter, second quarter of next year, starting with the most sophisticated users, mandates on those users, and then, moving in sort of a sequence process through, the less sophisticated people have more operational issues. So we think that's the type of timetable that if it were laid out clearly from the regulators, you'd see a tremendous amount of focus and innovation and sort of work towards achieving those goals.
So, and do you picture between the sophisticated users and the balance of the marketplace a 3-month transition, a 6-month transition, a year transition?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's we don't have a specific recommendation, but we think sort of quarterly rolling in different layers of participants would make some sense.
So let's say the initial deadline on trading was say March 2012. Do you picture the clearing date being the same date or a difference there?
I think we think some type of lag between those two would make some sense operationally, but not a significant one. So, lagging it by a couple of months or a quarter could make some sense. We also think, allowing for some voluntary compliance, maybe the first quarter of 2012 includes voluntary compliance with the clearing mandate. People work out the plumbing and test trades would certainly seem to make a lot of sense.
Anybody have a radically different opinion they want to share on this? No. Okay. So I wanted to turn second to a point a couple of you mentioned, which was the separation of the trading and clearing dates and the lack of confidence if your trade is not a trade until it's cleared at some future point. It's my understanding in the commodities market that these are done simultaneously. What is driving that separation, and how long a time lag are we talking about? And is it a startup problem to have those things happen simultaneously, or some type of long-term structural philosophical fight going on here?
If I could, maybe I'll just start by talking about how it works in the futures model, and then hand it over to the other participants here. I mean, in the futures model, the essence of it is that there is a pre-trade credit check. So, for example, in the Eris exchange platform, there are credit controls on the platform. So if you see a bid or an offer for a 200 million size, 5-year swap quote, that has been pre-approved, and there is a clearing firm standing behind that quote. In addition, when you submit a block trade, we have credit controls at the clearinghouse. I mean, on entry to the clearinghouse. So either the trade is submitted and it's good, or the trade never existed. It's rejected for credit. The SEF model, I'll let the others comment on that. Today is, we're working through those issues where the SEF is not directly connected to the clearinghouse, and I'll let others comment on how that's being worked out.
Okay.
Sure.
So, on its face, Neil is correct, Senator. Real-time acceptance of trades in the futures context works and has worked well for many years, whether it be on an exchange or in the Clearport example with CME in a more decentralized basis. That is something that the CFTC and regulators have called for with suggested rules for the OTC space, and we don't see from where we sit a problem with that. The MFA has also come out in support of, as has the STMA come out in support of real-time acceptance of clearing. And if you think about it, it's really mission critical to the success of clearing because it really comes down to the fundamental integrity of the marketplace. Whereas in the bilateral market space, trades would go unsettled a few years ago, even for as many as 3 to 4 years. Now that window is down to a few days or a week, but that's still relative to other markets quite a long time. So it creates an uncertainty between the SEF and the DCO, and ultimately it ends up with a customer having a lost faith in the marketplace. So the technology is there now to use and is available, and people are working towards using it.
So I want to back up and see if I heard you correctly. You say that commodity trades in the near past sometimes were unsettled for 3 or 4 years?
CDS trades, certainly, yeah. Back in 2003 to 2004, there were many trades that had been unsettled. Some trades had actually gone, had matured before they had settled.
Okay.
So one of the big differences between the futures market and the new sort of stuff-cleared swaps environment, at the futures market, you have one exchange feeding one clearinghouse. In the swaps environment going forward, we're going to have many execution venues feeding many clearinghouses. So that makes ensuring that the execution venues and the clearinghouses all have the most up-to-date information a much more complex process. Now, to Jamie's point, the technology certainly exists to allow that. There are a few thoughts about how this would work. Some think that we should have a central utility that will look at all of the limits in the client accounts at the clearinghouse and hold that and feed that information out to all the SEFs and clearinghouses. There's also a thought that the clearinghouses, since it's about the clearing account, that they will hold the information, and when they get a new trade, they will broadcast that out to all the relevant SEFs and the other clearinghouses. Many of the dealers, though, are concerned that they don't want to have to give up their essentially the risk models they use to determine how much a client can trade to an outside party. So many of the big dealers would rather, as they say, we'll tell you when to stop a certain client from trading. We'll let you know. So again, as Jamie said, the technology is certainly there, but I think it's more of an operational concern than it is a technology concern.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Senator Corker, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for your testimony. And for what it's worth, I thought your answer to Senator Crapo's question was, considering that each of you sort of benefit from these new regulations, was pretty judicious, and I thank you for that and for being forthcoming in that regard. I would ask this question back home in Tennessee. People are saying, we wish that you guys would quit helping us the way that you are in Washington. Who is it that we're actually helping with the creation of these SEFs? We met with some of the big traders Monday, and the big market makers obviously are not being helped by this in any way. So who is it that we are helping?
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that. I mean, if implemented correctly, it's a big if. I mean, we believe principles-based is the way to go. But if implemented correctly, we believe the ultimate end users, the asset managers, the people who are the end users of swaps products, would have more transparency if these systems were able to connect correctly. There were real-time trade acceptance, and you had price feeds in which you could rely for transactable swap prices.
So, I mean, I thought y'all, again, judiciously answered the question, but, when you've got a large block trade and you're used to dealing, your client, a BlackRock or a PIMCO, is used to dealing with a certain dealer, and they want to unload a position, and they're willing to take it, it does seem that this is a problem as it relates to people being able to front run if they've got to report too quickly. I mean, that's a heck of a problem, is it not?
Yeah, and that's why it is absolutely critical to get that block trade threshold right. And again, just to point to the futures market, the BlackRocks, the PIMCOs, those players are very active participants in the futures market, and they use the transparent order book. Yeah. And then when they need to do
but futures are a little bit different. That's a little bit more of a plain vanilla market than can happen with swaps. Is that not correct?
Well, there are a number of standardized vanilla swaps that are actually very like futures. I mean, that's the issue. For standardized swaps, that's generally what we're talking about, trading in a centralized, central limit order book or
so let me ask you this question. So let's say that you are involved in a large trade and you're creating a liquidity for a client, and right now I know the CFTC is talking about reporting in 15 minutes. Pretty hard to unload a big book in 15 minutes. What isn't? Why not end of day reporting? Why have a 15-minute reporting guideline?
I mean, again, I think that's our position on that, and the partners in our exchange would be that's where principles-based regulation is important.
So end of day would be fine on the large.
I think it depends on the marketplace. I think it's every market's different. Different swaps require different treatment.
But I'd love to have some other input here. It sounds like y'all are actually in agreement that 15 minutes is way too short.
Well, it really, we're not in agreement with that, Senator. I think 15 minutes for the futures market is pretty consistent with the liquidity that's offered within the interest rate swap market and certainly in the indices, which is 40% of the credit derivatives market. 15 minutes by certain market participants is viewed as too long. I think it really comes back to Neil's point, which is it's specific to the liquidity in a particular marketplace. If you look to the futures world or exchanges today, it's 15 minutes. At some point it was an hour, and at some point it was end of day when the markets were less liquid. So the point, the key thing then is to measure the amount of liquidity within the marketplace that allows that market maker the opportunity to trade out of that position and to hedge it appropriately. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about 2-year interest rate swaps that their average ticket size is $400 million at a clip, that's pretty good liquidity.
Mm-hmm. So it is kind of interesting, do you not agree, that on one hand we've castigated the heck out of high-frequency trading in equities, and yet we're moving towards sort of algorithm type trading on the swap side? I mean, is that an interesting?
Yeah, well, I can comment
point?
on that,
Okay.
Senator. So the alternative, if the block trading rules are too onerous and the market sees that will create too much information leakage, the alternative will be to then take your $400 million and you can use an algorithm to split it up into 400 trades and spread it all across a variety of steps, which is exactly what happened in the equities market. And I think some feel that that's made the equities market more liquid, but others feel that it's made it much more complex to understand who's doing what and what's going on.
But you would agree that we sort of have a bipolar way of thinking here. On one hand, we want to move away from that on equities, but on the other hand, we're driving towards that in swaps.
There's no question, and I'm in the process of research now where we've been talking to a number of the proprietary trading firms about this issue. Now, let's remember that in equities as well, they provide a lot of liquidity to the market, and it also ensures that prices are much more in line. So futures prices, swaps prices, everything will line up much more closely than it does today. And that should ultimately result in better prices for the end user who needs to do an interest rate swap, to hedge their loan book.
So, we actually watched, I watched one occur. It's not that interesting, actually. But, we watched this occur a little bit on Monday, and it is kind of like if I'm a client and I've been used to dealing with X dealer, and now I've got to get 5 bids, if you will. That just seems ridiculous to me. I mean, if I want to, you look at the spread differences, very, very minor in these trades. Is that not onerous to make a client that does this on a daily basis have to get 5 bids? Is that not just ridiculous?
Senator, I think what we're really talking about here, we keep on going back to the point of flexibility. The reality is that in any given set of circumstances.
But the CFTC is not acting as if they're giving flexibility. They're talking 15 minutes and 5 bids. So you're saying that's wrong, is that correct?
Our thought currently is that it's very hard. That 2 things will happen if you're prescriptive about exactly what RFQ needs to happen and reporting deadlines, is that as the market evolves and liquidity changes, people may not actually be able to get execution or may not actually want to go out to that level of market players for their own shareholders' reasons. And we may be creating more risk by being prescriptive about protocols versus having a principles-based approach, which gives people a framework to operate in, but gives them the flexibility to adapt to their business models.
And just, I know my time is up. A lot of concern by folks with these new rules that we're putting in place with developing markets going elsewhere. Not sort of the industrialized countries, but Latin America and other places having to live by our rules will go outside of the U.S. To execute. Do y'all not have similar concerns based on, again, what the CFTC and others have laid out thus far?
Well, I think clearly we operate in a very global market, and a lot of entities there's a lot of U.S.-based entities, but there are also a lot of other, regional entities. And I think that insofar as we create difference in regulation, or there will exist different regulatory regimes, I think at the end of the day, entities will go to wherever they feel the regime is the most appropriate for their activities.
So the answer is yes.
Yes.
So, Mr. Chairman, this has been a great hearing. I do hope maybe in listening to the testimony, these guys all benefit from what we're doing. I mean, and I'm glad they're here, that they're going to make a lot of money off what we've done, and I'm glad they are. But they themselves are talking about some of the frailties, and maybe there's something we might do together, letter writing wise, to CFTC to make sure that what they do is not so rigid and prescriptive that we actually have unintended consequences. I thank you for the hearing and thank you for the time.
Thank you, Senator Corcoran. Just let me return to the point that Senator Crapo made, which is the idea of coordinating as much as we can imagine unified set of rules that apply to the SEC regulated entities, which is our jurisdiction, and the CFTC entities, which is the jurisdiction of the Agricultural Committee. But I think one strong message we want to send today based on this testimony and based on Senator Corker's comments is a notion of a sensible, unified rules that our industries can profit by, and not only industries, but the end users and the community at large. I think one of the points, and you raise your hand if I'm way off base, but we've seen in equities trading because of the efficiencies brought to the market that the spread has come down considerably, and with the benefit of the people who buy and sell stocks every day. That's a lot of people, pension funds, all sorts of folks. And I think my sense is, based on your testimony, we'll see the same thing if we get this right in terms of the swaps market, and that would be useful to the whole economy, a more efficient economy. But I think, Senator Corker, we certainly hope that our colleagues across the way in CFTC and SEC pay close attention to what's said today, and we can follow up. Senator Hagan, you've arrived there. We have a panel with your questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Mr. McDonald, in your testimony, you state that Bloomberg intends to be prepared to begin swap execution facility operations on the implementation of regulations by the CFTC and the SEC, provided that the two regulators create synchronized rules governing trading protocols, board composition, and financial reporting. Would you like to comment quickly on how that synchronization is progressing? And also, I would like to ask, why are trading protocols, board composition, and financial reporting important to your ability to begin operations, and can you address each one individually?
Sure. So from our perspective, we are ready to operate as both a swaps execution facility and a security-based execution facility. I can't talk specifically to the cooperation between the CFTC and the SEC because obviously I spend most of my time in New York. That said, when we look at the facts as we know them today, there are a couple of areas that raise some concern for us when we look at becoming both an execution facility and a security-based execution facility, namely the one that will have to actually create two companies that have different board requirements in order to operate in markets that are very similar in terms of the end user base. So our concerns are really more around, and I'll address first of all the governance and the independence, and then I'll address the trading protocols. From a governance and independence perspective, we understand and we recognize the need for independence in both kind of the company structure and the governance around the swaps execution facility for obvious reasons. Our point is that we are already an independent company, so forcing us to put independence on top of independence doesn't really make sense from both a commercial and a structural perspective, and that's one of the things we're looking at. We know that the CFTC has slightly different rules in that regard than the SEC. The SEC requires a majority of the board to be independent, whereas the CFTC only requires 35%. When we talk about trading protocols, our point is really that of our customers. We are, as an institution, just an intermediary between buyers and sellers. And our view from a very long experience in this market is that it's very hard to have a one-size-fits-all when you talk about RFQ or indeed any trading protocol. And there are two main reasons for that. Firstly, if you define a specific protocol, the issue that you will face is that as the market evolves and liquidity does change in these markets, that protocol may become inappropriate and actually increase more risk in a given set of market circumstances than reduce. The other point that we'd make is that the fact that by not using a principles-based approach and by being prescriptive about the types of protocols, what risks to happen is that it will make the market less competitive and more utility style because people will not be able to innovate because they're constrained in terms of what they can do as a CEF. So those would be the points we'd make.
Thank you. Let me ask Mr. McDonald, also in your testimony you noted that elaborate execution protocols will increase the direct cost of trading and could drive business off of the swap execution facilities, or what I would hate to see, into foreign jurisdictions. How would you judge the proposed rules that are coming out of the CFTC and the SEC against this standard?
Well, we think, when I talk about an RFQ with a minimum of 5, or in the SEC's case, an RFQ with resting orders for the winning bid, I think the issue with these is really what will happen is that they can create direct costs for a number of reasons. Firstly, because of this element of what people call the winner's curse, i.e. the fact that I know that I've got 4 other people in competition with me on that trade, means that people are not necessarily in every circumstance going to want to show the best prices possible. Because the result of 4 people knowing that trade got executed in the market means that when the entity that did win the trade has to turn around and go and hedge that out, then there are 4 people in the market who know that hedge activity is about to happen in the interdealer market. And that will have an impact on price, and therefore a direct impact on the end user. Another point which is a little bit less, perhaps a little bit less obvious, is that what may happen in order to mitigate that risk is the execution size will get reduced, and so people will actually execute in smaller sizes in order for that kind of winner's curse or information not to be as apparent in the market. What that has is a direct operational cost on the end user. So I'll give you an example. If I'm a fund manager and I have to do an allocation on a trade, so I may want to do a block trade for, let's say, 100 million and want to allocate that out to 50 funds. If I go out and I actually have to, instead of just doing 1 trade and 1 set of allocations, I actually have to go out and do 5 trades to reduce the size. I now have to do 250 allocations, which significantly raises the cost on me as an end user in terms of processing that trade. So that's what we mean by raising direct cost.
And how about the threat of sending those offshore?
Well, I mean, I think it's clear, and that this is a global market, and I think when we look at the regulatory proposals that we see in the US versus what we see in Europe and other jurisdictions, that the risk that we highlight is one where different regions have different regulations, and then companies that are not subject to US rules will make the decision as to whether they want to operate inside the US or outside the US for trading activity, and that I think is a valid risk.
Thank you. Mr. McPartland, you raised what I think is an important issue, and with the proliferation of SEFs and clearinghouses, how will credit risk be managed across entities? And do you see this as a potential source of systemic risk?
The technology certainly exists to manage the problems, but operationally it's very, very complicated when we have a number of different entities with different needs and different end games. So we should not try to regulate how this should work. However, the industry needs to come to some consensus as to how these issues will be resolved before the market can move forward effectively. The faith in a SEF execution is very much so based on the industry's knowledge that it will be accepted for clearing. And that goes to the point of ensuring that the interconnectivity between the SEFs, the clearinghouses, the swap data repositories is all very well defined and available to the market participants.
And how will the industry come together to make these decisions?
Well, the industry has been working together for the last few years, obviously, on many of these issues through the industry bodies. It is in everybody's best interest to ensure that this does work. The changes are coming, so to that, the more efficient that the process can be, the easier it will be for everybody to modify their strategies and their business approach to work in the new environment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Senator Toomey. Please, Senator Toomey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just had one quick question for any of the panelists that would like to respond to, and that is the fact that the SEC and the CFTC have different rules that are, especially with respect to, for instance, the number of dealers who'd have to quote on a price, the timing that would be required to intervene before the disclosure of block trades. Frankly, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I understand they regulate slightly different kinds of contracts, but at the end of the day, is it your view that we ought to harmonize this and we ought to have the same requirements between the CFTC and the SEC?
Well, Senator, let me attempt to answer that. The SEC regulates credit derivatives,
Right.
and the CFTC regulates interest rate swaps and indices. And I think when you consider those three different swap classes, there's different liquidity considerations in each. So consequently, there should be different block size, block trade reporting requirements in terms of size, and also in terms of time. So it's certainly consistent that they would have different views for each particular class, especially when you look to other asset classes where similar rules exist, be it in futures or options or even in the equity markets. With regard to your concern vis-a-vis RFQ and the potential limitations that may have on liquidity, whereas on one hand a customer is loath to put their name, size, and direction out on a particular trade to multiple counterparties, the one also has to measure it against the tension by giving it out to too few. One of the suggestions from the SEC, for example, has required that an RFQ go out to one entity. We think that is fraught with danger from a market manipulation standpoint, and we should protect against that. Customers certainly have the ability to go out to 5 or 3 or whatever the number is. I don't think they're looking to go out to see 10 or 15 or 20. Under those certain rules, they don't necessarily have to show their name. In addition to size and direction, they can initiate what are known as anonymous RFQs, and they can certainly access the central limit order book or the exchange marketplace as well, so they can avoid the RFQ requirement altogether. So there's certainly many avenues for customers to come in and trade.
Mr. McPartland, I'm wondering if you have a different perspective on this.
I think Jamie raises some very valid points. The credit market, the rates market, they're very different. They have very different users, very different uses for those products. However, I would suggest that the regulations should be considerably more harmonized than they are, and it would be left then to the CEFs and the market participants to ensure that the CEFs that are focused on trading credit derivatives are designed in such a way that it helps liquidity in those markets, and the same for the interest rate markets. So rather than regulatory differences, we would have differences in business models in the CEFs that are trading in those products.
Mr. Brady, anything you'd care to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're turning to the theme, a number of us, urging the regulators to take a principles-based approach. I mean, certainly more harmonization between the CFTC and SEC is welcome, but I think we also recognize that markets are different, and both agencies should strive to take a principles-based approach.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald?
Sure. I think there's broadly three things here. The first is that as pertains to block sizes and trade reporting requirements, I think clearly there are nuances between each element of these markets, and whatever the end regulations will be should be reflective of that. I think when we talk about execution protocols, I echo what Nick said, which is that it needs to be a principle-based approach. I think it's important to note that there is quite a strong correlation between the single name space, which will be regulated by the SEC, and the index space, which will be regulated by the CFTC, and therefore it's important that users have a similar experience on executing on both of those platforms. The last point I'd like to make is really the one about governance and within the CEF space. I think that it's clear that the population and size of the market that will be regulated by the SEC is much smaller than the one which is going to be regulated by the CFTC. And I think that if the barriers to entry to the CEF space and the governance rules that are put in place by the SEC are prohibitive, I think what you may end up having is a mismatch between the platforms that operate in the index and swap space versus the platforms that operate in the single name space, because it may not be commercially viable for somebody to build an entity or a company to operate in the SEC space.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. And thank you, gentlemen, for excellent testimony. And I would like the next panel to come forward. Thank you. You can introduce him. Yeah, right off the top. I'd like to recognize my colleague, Senator Toomey, to introduce Mr. Thumb. Senator.
Thank you very much, Chairman Reed, for giving me this opportunity to introduce Mr. William Thum, a principal of the Vanguard Group in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Vanguard is, of course, one of the world's largest investment management companies, employing over 12,000 people in the United States and abroad. Mr. Thum is currently the Senior Derivatives Transactional and Regulatory Specialist in Vanguard's legal department. Try saying that 5 times fast. Prior to joining Vanguard in 2010, Mr. Thum was a partner with Fried, Frank, Harris, Shriver, and Jacobson, LLP, from 1998 to 2007. He was an executive director and head of institutional securities documentation for the Americas at Morgan Stanley. From 96 to 98, Mr. Thum was a vice president and head of derivatives documentation at UBS. He also worked at BNP Paribas in New York and at Dresdner Kleinwort in London as legal counsel. Mr. Thum has been an active contributor to industry efforts to develop market standard documents for derivatives trading. He's a frequent lecturer on legal and regulatory issues relating to derivatives and has participated in several joint CFTC-SEC public roundtables on Dodd-Frank Act related rulemaking. Mr. Thum received his J.D. from the American University, Washington College of Law, and his B.A. from Bucknell. He's admitted to the bar in both New York and Pennsylvania, and I am very pleased that Mr. Thum could be with us today. I welcome his testimony, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And let me introduce our other panelist. Stephen Merkel is Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary of BGC Partners, positions he has held since the formation of BGC's predecessor, eSpeed, in 1999. He is the current chairman and a founding board member of the Wholesale Market Brokers Association, Americas, the independent industry body representing the largest interdealer brokers operating in North America, wholesale markets across a broad range of financial products. He serves as a member of the supervisory board of ELX Futures LP, a fully regulated electronic U.S. futures exchange. He is currently also Executive Managing Director, General Counsel, and Secretary of Cantor Fitzgerald LP, which he joined in 1993. Thank you, Mr. Merkel, for joining us. Christopher Berry is a Managing Director at Jefferies & Company in the Fixed Incomes New York office and co-head of rates trading and sales. Under Mr. Berry's leadership, Jefferies has expanded its global rates trading and sales capabilities, including attaining primary dealer status with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, as well as equivalent dealer recognition in multiple European countries. Prior to joining Jefferies in January 2009, Mr. Berry spent more than 13 years in fixed income trading at Merrill Lynch, where he most recently headed Merrill Lynch Government Securities, Inc., and was trading manager of the USD agency desk. Prior to trading agency debt, Mr. Berry traded USD interest rate swaps and options for Merrill Lynch. Gentlemen, your testimony has been made part of the record. Please use your 5 minutes to make any comments that you like. Mr. Thum, please.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Crapo, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for having me here today. My name is William Thum, and I'm Principal and Senior Derivatives Counsel, Vanguard. Headquartered in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, Vanguard is one of the world's largest mutual fund firms. We offer more than 170 U.S. mutual funds with combined assets of approximately $1.7 trillion. We serve nearly 10 million shareholders, including American retirees, workers, families, and businesses, whose objectives include saving for retirement, for children's education, or for a down payment on a house or a car. Vanguard's mutual funds are subject to comprehensive regulatory regime and are regulated under 4 federal securities laws. As a part of the prudent management of our mutual funds, we enter into swaps to achieve a number of benefits for our shareholders, including hedging portfolio risk, lowering transaction costs, and achieving more favorable execution compared to traditional investments. Vanguard has been supportive of the Dodd-Frank Act's mandate to bring regulation of the derivatives markets to identify and mitigate potential sources of systemic risk. Vanguard supports a phased implementation schedule over an 18 to 24-month period following rule finalization based on the following objectives. Number 1, prioritizing risk reduction over changes to trading practices and market transparency. Prioritizing data reporting to inform future rulemaking relating to trading practices and market transparency to minimize a negative impact on liquidity. Harmonizing overlapping U.S. and global regulatory efforts and allowing immediate voluntary access for all party types to the new platforms with mandated compliance to apply initially to swap dealers and to major swap participants. In view of the time needed to digest the final rules and to develop industry infrastructure, to implement complex operational connections required for reporting, clearing, and exchange trading, to educate clients on the changes and to obtain their consent to trade in the new paradigm, and to negotiate new trading agreements across all trading relationships, Vanguard supports the following implementation schedule. 6 months from the final rules, the swap data repositories, derivatives clearing organizations, CEFs, and middleware providers must complete the build-out of their respective infrastructures. 6 to 12 months from the final rules, all participants should voluntarily engage in reporting, clearing, and trading platforms. 12 months from the final rules, all participants should be mandated to report all swaps involving all parties. Dealers and major swap participants should be mandated to clear the first list of standardized swaps. 18 months from the final rules, all participants should be mandated to clear the first list of standardized swaps. CEFs and commissions can analyze SDR swap data for liquidity across trading types to make informed CEF trading mandates, block trade size, and reporting delays. Dealers and major swap participants should be mandated to trade the first list of standardized swaps made available for trading on CEFs. And 2 years from the final rules, all participants should be mandated to trade the first list of standardized swaps made available for trading on CEFs with delayed public reporting of block trades based on historical relative liquidity. The need for phased implementation schedules supported by studies which have identified significant differences in liquidity between the swaps and futures markets. While futures trading is characterized by high volumes of a limited range of trade types, of small sizes and limited duration, the swaps market has an almost unlimited range of trade types of much larger sizes with a much longer duration. Swaps liquidity varies dramatically, with high liquidity for 2-year U.S. dollar interest rate swaps and much smaller liquidity in credit default swaps on emerging market corporate entities. The potential negative consequences to liquidity are best demonstrated by the impact of the premature public reporting of large-sized block trades. When quoting a price for a block trade, dealers typically charge a slight premium to the then current market price for a similar trade of a more liquid size. Once the trade is executed, the dealer executes one or more liquid size mirror trades at current market prices to lay off its position and to flatten the market exposure. The premature public dissemination of block trades will provide the market with advanced knowledge of the dealer's imminent trading and is therefore likely to move the market against the dealer. Fund investors will ultimately bear the increased price of relevant trades or the increased costs of establishing positions using multiple trades of liquid sizes. The CFTC's proposed test for block trade size and the CFTC and SEC's proposed time delay for the public dissemination of block trade data are too conservative and are likely to have a serious negative impact on liquidity. Particularly as such proposals address market transparency and not market risk, the more prudent approach would be to make informed decisions based on a thorough analysis of market data with larger block trade sizes and more prompt public reporting for the most liquid products and lower sizes and delayed reporting for less liquid products. There are a number of other significant issues related to CEF trading mandates proposed by each of the CFTC and SEC, which I'm happy to discuss. Such issues include the CFTC's proposed requirement for requests for quotes to be distributed to a minimum of 5 dealers, the CFTC and SEC's mandate for participants to take into account or to interact with other resting bids and offers, the CFTC's requirement for there to be a 15-second delay involving crossing trades, and the need for harmonization across the CFTC and SEC rulemaking to avoid unnecessary complexities. Thank you for the opportunity to share our views of the subcommittee, and we'll be pleased to serve as a resource for the members with respect to the swaps rulemaking exercise.
Thank you very much. Mr. Merkel, please.
Thank you, Chairman Reed and Ranking Member Crapo, for providing this opportunity to participate in today's hearing. My name is Stephen Merkel, and in addition to my role at BGC Partners, I am the chairman of the Wholesale Markets Brokers Association Americas, an independent industry body whose membership includes the largest North American interdealer brokers. I'm here today representing the members of the WMBA. The WMBA recently filed a comment letter to the SEC and CFTC summarizing the positions we have taken on several of their proposals over the last year. I would ask permission to submit this letter
without objection.
Thank you. Wholesale brokers are today's marketplaces in the global swaps market, and as such can be a prototype for prospective independent and competitive swap execution facilities, or CEFs. As we sit here today, interdealer brokers are facilitating the execution of hundreds of thousands of over-the-counter trades corresponding to an average of $5 trillion in notional size across a wide range of asset classes. Although the Dodd-Frank Act created the term SEF, the concept of counterparties to a trade, utilizing an intermediary to execute transactions, has been around for a very long time. At the core of Title VII is a competitive marketplace. The Dodd-Frank Act specifically did not dictate that all mandatory trades go through monopolistic exchanges, and instead permits these trades to be executed across an array of over-the-counter competitive SEFs. SEFs do not operate as siloed monopolistic exchanges. Instead, we operate as competing execution venues, where BGC and its competitors aggressively vie with each other to win their customers' business through better price, provision of superior market information and analysis, deeper liquidity, and better service. It is vital to ensure that SEFs are brought under the new regulatory regime in such a way that fosters the competitive nature of OTC markets and continues to provide a deep source of liquidity for market participants. WMBA member firms are currently fully functional, having the capacity to electronically capture and transmit trade information with respect to transactions executed on our trading platforms, as well as the ability to execute or trade swaps by accepting bids and offers made by multiple participants through any means of interstate commerce, including use of electronic and voice trading platforms. I would suggest that there are 4 critical elements regulators need to get right. First, SEFs must not be restricted from deploying the many varied trade execution methods successfully used today. Second, regulators need to carefully structure a public trade reporting system that takes into account the unique challenges of swaps trading. If the rules do not properly define the size of block trades, information and time delays, they will surely cause a negative impact on liquidity, disturbing end users' ability to hedge commercial risk and to plan for the future. Third, the goal of pre-trade transparency must be realized through means that are already developed by wholesale brokers to garner and disseminate pricing information, and not by artificial mechanisms that may restrict market liquidity for end users and traders. Finally, regulation should support the formation of a common regulatory organization for SEFs to implement and facilitate compliance with the new regulatory regime, to prevent a, quote, race to the bottom, unquote, for rule compliance and enforcement programs. As it relates to modes of execution, Dodd-Frank expressly permits swaps to be executed by SEFs using any means of interstate commerce. The WMBA believes the SEC's interpretation of the SEF definition is consistent with the statute, as it allows trade execution through any means of interstate commerce, including request for quote systems, order books, auction platforms, or voice brokerage trading. WMBA believes that this approach should be applied consistently to all trading systems or platforms and will encourage the growth of a competitive marketplace for trade execution facilities. By contrast, the CFTC's pending rule is much more restrictive than Dodd-Frank's express language and prescribes specific modes of execution for different types of trades. In fact, the CFTC's proposed rule would severely limit the ability of SEFs to communicate with their customers telephonically in the course of a transaction. Such a limitation of voice communications is completely inconsistent with the statute. I thank you for your time and look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Burry, please.
Good morning. My name is Chris Burry, and I am the co-head of Rates, Sales, and Trading for Jeffries & Company. Chairman Reed and Ranking Member Crapo, thank you for inviting me to testify this morning regarding the emergence of swap execution facilities, or as they have come to be known, SEFs. Jeffries is a full-service global securities and investment banking firm that, for almost 50 years, has been serving issuers and investors. We provide investment banking and research, sales, and trading services and products to a diverse range of corporate clients, government entities, institutional investors, and high-net-worth individuals. Over the last 5 years, our firm's annual revenue, equity market capitalization, and global headcount have increased significantly, with now almost $3 billion in annualized net revenue, over $4 billion in equity market value, and soon to be 3,600 employees. It bears noting that during the same period, that is, during the financial crisis, at no time did Jeffries seek or receive taxpayer assistance. As a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange, our capital comes solely from the markets, and Jeffries' ability to persevere and emerge from the financial crisis positioned for growth and diversification can best be attributed to the firm's focus on a strong capital position, ample liquidity, and sound risk management. there are a few key points that Jefferies would like to convey to the subcommittee. First, we are ready to go. From our perspective, the architecture, infrastructure, and technology necessary to bring the over-the-counter derivatives markets into an era of transparency, dispersed counterparty risk, and open access are in place. Just as we are a leading provider of liquidity and execution in stocks and bonds, we believe we can become a leading provider to buyers and sellers of derivatives. The market awaits the adoption of final rules. It is a fallacy to suggest that rules should be delayed to allow more time for this market structure to develop. Second, we believe that those sections of Title VII of Dodd-Frank pertaining to SEF trading of derivatives are necessary to remedy the artificial barriers to entry in the OTC derivatives market. Third, implementation timelines should be the top priority at this juncture. The proposed rules are generally clear and understandable. The market needs the certainty of when the rules will become applicable far more than it needs any more suggestions about how bilateral agreements offer an alternative to central clearing. Fourth, it is vitally important to guard against the development of market structures that enable opaque bilateral contract relationships to continue to exist. Current standardized execution agreement proposals for centrally cleared swaps do nothing but preserve the closed and anti-competitive elements of these markets as they existed prior to the financial crisis. Fifth, the adoption of the rules and a clear timeline for implementation of Title VII will bring to the markets the same clear benefits gained from similar developments in equities and futures markets: increased access, expanded competition, improved price transparency, and decentralized risk. For years, firms such as Jefferies were effectively locked out of being a dealer in the OTC market by virtue of a series of artificial barriers and requirements that perpetuated a closed system. The weaknesses and lack of true competition of that closed system exacerbated the credit crisis of 2008 to the great expense of our economy. We support the implementation of SEF trading as quickly and responsibly as possible. We believe that these provisions will increase transparency, reduce systemic risk, increase competition, and broaden access to centralized clearing within the derivatives marketplace, all of which will benefit the American taxpayer. Our industry is approaching full readiness for standardized OTC derivatives contracts to begin trading on SEFs. If the proposed rules are implemented by the end of 2011, Jefferies would anticipate that trading volumes will begin increasing by the fourth quarter of this year and then increase significantly into 2012 as we approach final implementation of mandatory SEF trading of standardized derivatives. A firm timeline for mandatory SEF trading on the most standardized swaps will be instrumental for the market to achieve its full potential. In conclusion, Jefferies believes that implementation of Title VII reforms will unleash free market forces held in check by entrenched business models, and we are ready and eager to compete in the derivatives marketplace. Thank you for inviting me to testify today, and I look forward to any questions the subcommittee may have.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your excellent testimony. Senator Toomey and I await momentarily a vote. We have a few minutes to get over there, but I think the best way to proceed would be to allow me to ask a general question to the panel and then recognize Senator Toomey for a question, and then be prepared for an avalanche of written questions because we unfortunately won't be able to explore in as much detail at this moment as we wanted to. But just picking up on something Mr. Burry said about these model contracts that are being developed that you suggest might be literally a choke point for access to the SEFs and the different trading platforms. Can you comment further on that in terms of your experience or what you see? And then I'll just ask Mr. Merkel and Mr. Thumb to comment too about this, because I believe some of the major associations are beginning to develop these types of contracts as an alternative to wider use of the SEFs. I think it's an important question. Mr. Burry, please.
Okay. One example of currently that's taking place in the marketplace is a execution agreement on cleared swaps. There has to be some market framework and workflow by which people can start to transact in the cleared environment. So there is currently an industry documentation effort that is underway where people can identify their counterparties and their clearing members for cleared derivatives. Unfortunately, at this point, we feel that it is overly complex and contains too many complicated built-in credit checking limits that, at the end of the day, somewhat limit people's ability and potential to transact on other venues or engage other counterparties. It is overly complex, and I think if the market shifts and market participants, combined with regulators overseeing the effort and helping the process along, focus on I guess the mandated clearing and immediate acceptance of clearing of transactions, then you won't have to rely on a Byzantine or complicated documentation framework.
Thank you. Mr. Merkel and Mr. Thumb, and thank you.
I would agree that there are real pressures and forces that work against breaking the status quo and opening up areas for competition, whether it's in clearing, whether it's in execution, whether it's in modes of execution. And I think that those, in many cases, those barriers to changing the status quo are subtle and difficult to discern. I do think there is an issue that I don't think the agencies are as focused on as they might be, and I think that is a considerable problem. There are some protections in Dodd-Frank with respect to this issue, with respect to impartial access, with respect to non-discriminatory clearing. I've not seen in the regulations that have come out much sensitivity to getting into that in detail. I have seen in the regulations, to the contrary, there's almost no references to them other than parroting what's in the statute, and what regulations we are seeing that come out in detail aren't even part of Dodd-Frank. So I think the regulators are focusing very much on recreating marketplaces or re-engineering marketplaces without regard to the effects on liquidity, but spending almost no time looking at trying to foster a competitive landscape.
Mr. Thumb, please.
Before you can have mandated trading, you have to have mandated clearing. Before you can have mandated clearing, you have to have the documentation in place. Indeed, ISDA and the FIA are developing standard addendums to overlay over existing futures agreements, which the market has in place. Unfortunately, there is no standard futures agreement in the market. Every dealer has its own unique futures agreement. Those futures agreements are developed for futures. They're not developed for swaps. There are business issues related to the trading of swaps, even clearing swaps, that are unique to swaps that are different from futures that will have to be addressed. There's an overlay that ISDA and the FIA have developed to supplement the existing futures agreement to allow central clearing. Unfortunately, those have to be negotiated bilaterally between every client and every clearinghouse, and the existing futures agreement may have to be upgraded as well. This is an enormous effort. Certainly, Vanguard is engaged in this at present, but the pipeline is limited in terms of the dealer's ability to digest renegotiating all of their existing futures agreements and have the addendum put in place. This will be a big problem in terms of having a very condensed implementation schedule, which is one of the reasons why I've laid out the sequence of having first reporting to inform decision-making on block trade size and delays, then have clearing layered in first for swap dealers and major swap participants, then have clearing laid in for the rest of the market, allowing 18 months to get these documents signed up, and then finally SEP trading after that.
Thank you very much. Senator Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Thum, I'd like to follow up with you on this. First of all, I'd like to commend you. I think this is a very sensible and very thoughtful proposal that lays out a phased implementation that makes a lot of sense and frankly is very helpful. My sense is that there's increasing consensus that there needs to be a phased implementation, but it's not yet clear to me that there's a complete consensus on what the sequence will be, nor necessarily on the overall timing. So you've touched on several reasons why this is important. The comments you just made about the necessity of getting the documentation in order. As I understand it, your testimony suggests that there could be a negative impact on liquidity if some of the rules, reporting rules, for instance, are not informed by the market data. Could you elaborate a little bit and maybe touch on other aspects, negative aspects that you're concerned about in the marketplace if there's not sufficient time for this implementation to occur?
Sure, and I think that's an excellent question. I think that the problem is that particularly as mandates are layered in place, you could have a situation where those that cross the finish line at an appropriate time consistent with a mandate are allowed to continue to trade swaps, clear and trade swaps, and those that do not get past the finish line, either because their business is not large enough to allow them through the pipeline at the dealer to get the documentation signed up, to have their infrastructure developed, to have all the operational connectivity in place. They will be effectively locked out of the market because of an arbitrary timeline that does not take into consideration all the things that need to be done. In recent CFTC and SEC roundtables, a focus has been on SDRs and gathering information. Once the final rules are in place, the SDRs think it will be 3 to 6 months before they are ready to be collecting the data and then have the data to allow the commissions and the SEPs to make decisions on block trade size and delays. So there's a whole sequence of getting the data, having the SDRs set up, getting the data in the door, allowing time for documentation to get clearing in place, and then once you have the data, analyze the data, assess liquidity, set appropriate block trade sizes and delays so that you can effectively allow for SEP trading. But all these things have to happen, and they have to happen in sequence, and they have to happen once the rules are finalized.
And I gather the bottom line is your concern is if it happens on too compressed the schedule, then there are significant participants that could be actually just frozen out of the activity until they're able to get up to compliance. And I suppose also the danger of inappropriate rules because they wouldn't be informed by sufficient history.
Exactly. And the largest players, some of which were mentioned today in the earlier panel, will probably get to the finish line very quickly, but the rest of the market may be left behind. And of course, the problem, the impacts on liquidity that have been talked about in the various panels will be significant.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Toomey. And gentlemen, thank you for your excellent testimony. We have a vote that is underway. But as again, we will, I'm sure, be responding, not just Senator Toomey and I, but others with questions for you. I want to thank all the witnesses for testifying today. We appreciate both the time and effort you made to join us this morning, your excellent testimony. It's been thoughtful, and it's also a great assistance to us, and I hope it's a great assistance to the agencies, the SEC and the CFTC, because one of the messages that's been consistent is coordination and accommodation and synchronization of their efforts to regulate the market. I'd also like to submit without objection for the record a written statement from the Investment Company Institute, ICI. And if members of the committee have their own written statements or additional questions to the witnesses, please submit them no later than close of business next Wednesday. The witnesses' complete written testimony will become part of the hearing record, and we are happy to include supporting documentation for the record. We ask that the witnesses respond to any questions within 2 weeks, and note that the record will close after 6 weeks in order for the hearing print to be prepared. And without further business, I will call the adjournment of the hearing. Thank you. That's all right. I noticed that when I was reading.